In a tense Osage community meeting in Oklahoma in 1921, Kanti, a resilient Osage woman, publicly accused oil tycoon William Hale of hiring people to kill her parents to seize their oil-rich land. Hale, with a confident smile, denied all accusations, causing some Osage people to doubt Kanti. That night, when Kanti returned home, she was horrified to discover that her sister Halona had been kidnapped. A threatening note was left behind. "Stay silent or your sister dies." Kanti was plunged into despair, facing a painful choice: abandon her fight to save Halona or continue exposing Hale, risking both their lives. "You killed my parents." William Hale, Kanti's voice rang out in the crowded Osage Community Hall in 1921. Her words slicing through the smoky air like a blade. The room fell silent, every eye on her, some shocked, others doubtful. Hale, the oil tycoon, smirked from his seat, his suit crisp, his confidence unshaken. Kanti, a 30-year-old Osage woman, stood tall despite the tremble in her hands, her dark eyes burning with grief and defiance. That night she stumbled home through Oklahoma's oil-soaked fields, only to find her house torn apart. Her 15-year-old sister, Halona, gone. A note stabbed into the table read, "Keep quiet, or your sister dies." Kanti sank to the floor, clutching Halona's rag doll, her heart shattered. A nurse in the Great War, she'd seen death's face. But nothing like this. Her parents' accident, years ago, brakes cut, car wrecked, had Hale's shadow all over it. Now, living for Halona's bright smile, Kanti faced a cruel choice: silence or justice. The oil derricks groaned outside, their greed fueling Hale's empire. Some Osage whispered she didn't belong, her war work with white doctors tainting her. Yet as tears fell, Kanti stood wiping her face. She'd save Halona and tear Hale down her war-hardened spirit, refusing to break. The Osage Community Hall buzzed with tension that night. In 1921, Kanti stood at the back, her pulse racing as the elders spoke about land and oil. She wasn't supposed to interfere. Women rarely did, but the truth burned inside her. When the floor opened, she stepped forward, her boots loud against the wood. The crowd hushed, staring at her. "William Hale killed my parents," she declared, her voice cutting through the silence. Gasps erupted. Some people clutched their chests. Others whispered in shock. "He wants our oil, our land," she added, her fists tight nails biting her skin. She remembered the crash, twisted metal, her parents gone, the sheriff shrugging it off. Hale stood up front, his suit crisp, his smile oily. "Proof, Kanti?" he asked, smooth and taunting. The room wavered. Some nodded at Hale, others pitied her. "Sheriff." Burns growled, "Enough," his hand on his gun. Kanti's face flushed with fury, but she sat, the weight of doubt heavy on her shoulders. After the meeting, the hall emptied, whispers trailing behind. Kanti sat frozen, replaying her failure. She'd expected allies, not dismissal. Near the door, Hale lingered with Sheriff Burns, their glances sharp like knives. Hale approached, his smile fake, his eyes cold. "Kanti," he purred, "I get it, you're hurting." His hand landed on her shoulder. She tensed, hating his touch. "But accusing me, that's reckless." His grip tightened briefly, a warning. "I know what you did," she hissed, trembling. He chuckled. "Be careful, girl," then strolled out, his car rumbling to life. Outside, Kanti saw shadows, men not Osage. Hale's thugs. Her stomach sank. She'd poked a bear, and now she stood alone, the night air biting her skin. Her resolve flickering but unbroken. Kanti walked home through the dark oil derricks, groaning in the distance. Her house loomed ahead, small and quiet. Too quiet. The door hung open. "Halona!" she called, stepping inside. Chaos greeted her. Chairs toppled, a lamp smashed. She ran to her sister's room, empty. Halona's doll abandoned on the bed. Her chest tightened as she searched, shouting Halona's name. In the kitchen, a knife pinned a note to the table. "Keep quiet, or your sister dies." The words hit like a punch. Kanti collapsed, tears streaming, guilt choking her. Halona gentle, kind. Halona taken because of her defiance. The wind screamed outside, shaking the walls, wiping her face. Kanti stood shaky but determined. She had to save her sister. Kanti tore through the house, desperate for clues. She flipped cushions, checked closets, even climbed into the dusty attic. Nothing, a muddy boot print by the back door and a snapped lock were all she found. She slumped at the table, the note glaring up at her. "Keep quiet, or your sister dies." Her mind spun. Fight Hale and risk Halona, or stay silent and let him win. Tears fell soaking her hands. She was alone. The community doubted her. The sheriff served Hale, and Halona was gone. Then a spark. Nokosi, her war buddy, now a reporter. He might help? Grabbing her coat, she stumbled into the night, fear and hope warring inside her, the cold biting her cheeks. Nokosi's shack glowed faintly as Kanti knocked, breathless. He opened the door, startled. "Kanti, what's wrong?" Inside papers littered the room, ink sharp in the air. "Halona's gone." She choked out, spilling everything. Hale, the meeting, the kidnapping. Nokosi's face darkened. "Hale's dangerous," he said, pacing. "She could be at one of his hideouts." Kanti's eyes blazed. "I'll find her first, then stop him." Nokosi nodded. "I'll dig around. Someone's seen something." Relief hit her. "Thank you," she whispered. "But Kanti," he warned, "Hale's got power. Watch your back." She clenched her jaw. "I won't stop until she's safe and he's done." Nokosi sighed, grabbing a notebook. "Let's start then." The night was dark and heavy as Kanti walked quickly through the empty streets of Pawhuska. Her heart thumped loudly, full of fear and worry for her missing sister, Halona. She needed help, and only one person came to mind, Nokosi, her old friend, who worked at the local newspaper. His small office glowed with a dim light, papers scattered everywhere. Kanti knocked on the door, her hands shaking. Nokosi opened it, his tired eyes widening when he saw her. "Kanti." "What's wrong?" he asked, stepping aside to let her in. The room smelled of ink and old coffee. "Halona's gone," Kanti said, her voice cracking. "I think Hale's men took her because I accused him of killing my parents." Nokosi shut the door, fast, checking the window. "Hale." "That's serious," he said, his face tight with concern. Kanti sat down, her breath uneven. "I found a note at home." It said to stop talking, or else, she explained, her fingers twisting together. Nokosi rubbed his chin, thinking hard. "I'll help you," he said finally, "but Hale's powerful. He's got eyes all over town." Kanti looked at him, hope mixing with her fear. "You'll really help?" she asked, her voice small but desperate. He nodded, grabbing a notebook. "I've got some leads on Hale." "We'll start there," he said, his tone firm. Kanti felt a tiny spark of relief. She wasn't alone anymore. The next evening, Kanti sat across from Nokosi in his cramped office. A single lamp buzzed above them, casting shadows on the walls. Nokosi pulled out a thick file from his desk, his hand steady, but his eyes worried. "Hale's not working alone," he said, opening the file. Kanti leaned in her stomach tight. "What do you mean?" she asked, watching him spread out papers and photos. "He's got a gang," Nokosi explained, led by Roy Bunch. "They scare people, Osage people, into giving up their land." He pointed to a blurry picture of a tough-looking man with a scar. "That's Roy. He's mean. Uses threats, fists, even guns." Kanti shivered, the air feeling colder. "What do they do?" She pressed her voice low. Nokosi flipped a page showing a list of names. "They burned Old Man C's house last year." "Another man, Waya, disappeared after saying no to Hale," he said grimly. Her heart sank deeper, and Halona, she whispered, fear clawing at her. Nokosi met her gaze. If they have her, it's to shut you up. Roy's crew doesn't mess around. He warned, closing the file. Kanti nodded, her hands clenched. She was scared, but anger was growing too. She wouldn't let them win. Kanti sat alone in her house, the silence pressing against her. Her mind drifted back to that awful day years ago. She and Halona, just kids then, were playing outside, chasing each other through the grass. The sun was warm, the air full of their laughter. Their parents waved as they climbed into the old car heading to town. "Be good girls," their mother called, smiling. Kanti waved back, carefree. Hours later, the sheriff came, his hat in his hands. "There was an accident," he said, his voice heavy. "The car, it crashed." They didn't make it. Kanti's world broke apart. She remembered Halona crying, clinging to her, but something felt wrong. She went to the crash site later, the twisted metal still smoking. She noticed the brakes cut clean, not broken. Her chest tightened with suspicion. Hale had visited their house days before, asking about their land. His smile, too sharp. Now, years later, the memory burned. It wasn't an accident, she whispered to herself, tears stinging her eyes. Hale had taken them, and she'd prove it. Kanti stood outside Aiyana's home, a small house decorated with Osage beads and feathers. Her heart raced as she knocked, needing guidance. Aiyana, a wise elder respected by all, opened the door. Her eyes kind but sharp. "Come in." Aiyana said, her voice calm. Inside, the smell of sage filled the air, and a fire crackled softly. Kanti sat on a woven mat, her hands fidgeting. "Aiyana, I need your help," she began, her voice trembling. "Hale took Halona. I think he killed my parents, too." Aiyana listened, her face still, but her eyes deep with understanding. "Hale's greed has hurt many," she said slowly, stirring the fire. Kanti swallowed hard. "I want to fight him, but I'm scared," she admitted, her shoulders slumping. Aiyana nodded, setting down her stick. "He's strong, Kanti. He's taken land, lives, hope from us," she said, her tone heavy with pain. "What do I do?" Kanti asked, leaning forward, desperate for an answer. Aiyana looked at her steady, and "You're not alone. Fight, but be smart. Hale's cunning, and he won't stop easily," she warned. Kanti felt a flicker of strength. She had to keep going. The firelight danced on Aiyana's face as she spoke her words, slow and powerful. Kanti sat close, hanging on every syllable. "You need proof." Aiyana said, her voice firm. "Hale's smart. He hides his tracks." Kanti nodded, her mind racing. "How do I get it?" she asked, her hands tightening into fists. "Watch him. Find his weaknesses." Aiyana replied. "Nokosi can help, he knows things. Others hate Hale, too." She paused, her eyes softening. "I lost my son to Hale's tricks. A deal that left him with nothing. Then he was gone," she said, her voice breaking slightly. Kanti's heart ached. "I'm sorry," she whispered, feeling Aiyana's pain echo her own. Aiyana shook her head. "Use that fire in you, Kanti. Gather our people. We're stronger together," she urged, her tone rising with hope. "But Hale, he'll come for me," Kanti said, fear creeping back in. Aiyana leaned closer. "He will, but we Osage are tough. You've got our spirit," she said, her eyes fierce. Kanti took a deep breath, her resolve hardening. She'd fight for Halona, for her parents, for everyone Hale had hurt. Kanti's boots crunched on the gravel as she and Nokosi neared the bar. The building looked worn, its walls stained with dirt, and a faint hum of voices leaked through the cracked windows. The smell of stale beer hit her as they paused outside. She wiped sweaty palms on her jeans, her stomach churning with nerves. Nokosi's eyes scanned the street, sharp and alert. "Roy's inside," he said quietly, pointing to a group of motorcycles parked nearby. "But this place is trouble. Stay close." Kanti nodded, her throat tight. She thought of Halona, small, scared, needing her, and that pushed her forward. They slipped inside. The air was hazy with smoke, the tables filled with rough-looking men. A loud laugh cut through the noise. Roy's voice. Kanti spotted him at the bar, his broad shoulders hunched, a bottle in hand. Her heart raced. She caught a snippet of talk from his crew. The kids locked up tight. It had to be Halona, fear and hope twisted together inside her. Kanti's legs shook as she crossed the bar, but she kept her chin up. Roy's eyes locked onto her, dark and cold, as she stopped in front of him. "Where's Halona?" she demanded, her voice louder than she felt. Roy smirked, setting his bottle down with a slow clink. "Who's this brave little thing?" he mocked, his tone dripping with scorn. The men nearby snickered, leaning closer. Kanti's hands balled into fists. "My sister. You took her. Tell me where she is." Roy stood towering over her, his scarred face twisting into a sneer. "You're digging your own grave, girl," he growled, stepping so close she could smell the tobacco on his breath. "Maybe she's better off without you, just like your folks were." The words stabbed deep, but Kanti didn't flinch. "She's all I have," she said, her voice cracking with anger and pain. Roy's hand hovered near his gun, his grin wicked. "Last chance, walk away." When her chest tightened with fear, but she stared back, defiance burning in her eyes. She wouldn't leave without answers. Roy's smirk vanished. "Get her!" he barked, and his men sprang up, chairs crashing to the floor. Kanti froze for a split second, panic flooding her. Nokosi grabbed her wrist, yanking her toward the back. "Move!" he shouted. They darted through the crowd, dodging outstretched hands. A bottle smashed near Kanti's feet. Glass flying. Her lungs burned as they hit the rear door, bursting into a dark alley. Heavy boots thundered behind them. Nokosi shoved her behind a dumpster, his breathing ragged. "Stay down," he hissed. Shadows of Roy's men loomed past, shouting curses. Kanti's heart hammered, her hands trembling against the cold metal. Then a grunt. A thug had spotted them. He lunged, grabbing her arm. She screamed, kicking wildly, until Nokosi tackled him, slamming the man into the wall. "Run!" Nokosi yelled again. They sprinted down the alley, weaving through trash cans, the sound of pursuit fading. When they finally stopped gasping in the shadows, Kanti realized they'd made it. Barely. Nokosi's quick thinking had saved her. Kanti leaned against a tree, her body aching, her mind racing. "We got nothing," she said bitterly, kicking at the dirt. Nokosi frowned, then reached into his jacket. "Not true," he said, holding out a crumpled paper. Kanti snatched it, her eyes scanning the scribbled words. 124 Old Mill Road. Her breath caught. "This fell from one of Roy's men in the chaos," Nokosi explained. She stared at the address, her fingers tightening around it. "It's a lid," she whispered, a tiny spark of hope igniting. The place was miles away, out past the town's edge. "Could be where Halona is," she added, her voice steadier now. Nokosi's brow furrowed. "Or a setup. We need to be smart about this." Kanti nodded, but her mind was already there, imagining Halona waiting. Needing her, she tucked the paper into her pocket, its edges worn but precious. "Tomorrow," she said firmly. "We go at dawn." For the first time since Halona vanished, Kanti felt like she was closing the distance between them. The house at 124 Old Mill Road loomed ahead, its roof sagging, windows dark and jagged like broken teeth. Kanti shivered as they approached, the wind whistling through the trees. Nokosi pried the door open, wood splintering under his hands. "Careful," he murmured, stepping inside first. The air was musty, thick with dust. Kanti's flashlight beam danced over peeling walls and scattered debris. They moved quietly, checking corners, an old chair, a shattered lamp, nothing else. Her hope started to fade, her chest heavy. Then in the last room, something glinted on the floor. She knelt, heart pounding, and picked it up, a small bracelet woven with blue and yellow beads. "Halona's!" she gasped, her voice breaking. She'd made it for her sister, a silly gift now worn and dusty. Tears stung her eyes as she clutched it, imagining Halona's tiny wrist. "She was here," Kanti whispered, half sobbing. Nokosi knelt beside her, his hand gentle on her back. "We'll find her," he promised. Kanti knotted the bracelet warm in her palm, a fragile thread, tying her to her sister. Kanti bhished open the creaky door of the abandoned house, her boots crunching on broken glass. Dust floated in the air, lit by the thin beam of her flashlight. She climbed the rickety stairs to the attic, her heart thudding with every step. There, between two warped floorboards, she spotted a small leather-bound notebook. She knelt down, her fingers brushing the rough cover as she pulled it free. The pages were brittle, filled with Hale's neat handwriting names like John Osage and Mary Tallchief, paired with dates and words like poisoned or accident. Then she saw it, her parents' names followed by land taken. Her stomach twisted and she gasped, dropping the flashlight. The room spun as the truth hit her. Hale had murdered her family for their oil-rich land. Tears stung her eyes, but she clenched the notebook tightly, her fear turning to fury. This was proof a weapon against him, yet as she stood a chill ran through her. Hale would kill to keep this secret. Kanti sat on the porch of their hideout, the notebook trembling in her hands. Nokosi stood beside her, peering over her shoulder as she turned the pages. Beyond the list of murders, she found something worse, notes about shipments of rifles and dynamite. Her voice shook as she read aloud, "He's not just killing us, he's selling weapons." Nokosi's jaw tightened, his fists clenching. Kanti's mind raced. Hale wasn't only a murderer, he was a warlord using Osage blood to fund his schemes. She pictured her community already broken, caught in his deadly game. Her chest ached with rage and helplessness. "He's destroying everything," she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. But then she froze. Exposing this could save lives, yet it might doom Halona, her kidnapped sister. She slammed the notebook shut, her breathing ragged. The weight of this secret crushed her, but she couldn't look away from the fight ahead. Kanti paced the tiny room, the notebook glaring at her from the table. Her mind screamed two things: save Halona or stop Hale. She pictured her sister's wide, scared eyes, trapped somewhere dark and cold. Her heart begged her to trade the notebook for Halona's life, but then she saw her parents' names again and the countless others Hale had killed. If she gave in, more would die, more families would shatter. She stopped gripping the table's edge, her knuckles white. "I have to end this," she muttered, her voice breaking. But what if Hale hurt Halona anyway? The thought stabbed her, and she sank to the floor, hugging her knees. Doubt clawed at her. Could she live with losing her sister? Could she live with letting Hale win? Tears streamed down her face as she rocked back and forth, torn apart by love and duty. Nokosi leaned against the wall, his arms crossed, staring at Kanti. "We take it to the press," he said, his voice firm. "This ends him." Kanti's head jerked up, her eyes wild. "And Halona! He'll kill her!" she snapped, slamming her hand on the table. Nokosi stepped closer, his tone steady. "If the world knows he's finished, they'll arrest him before he can touch her." Kanti shook her head, pacing again. "You don't get it. He owns the law here." Her voice cracked with fear. Nokosi grabbed her shoulders gently. "The press can protect her. People will demand justice." But Kanti pulled away, her mind spinning. "Or he'll use her against me," she whispered. Imagining Halona's cries, Nokosi sighed, his face tense. "We can't wait, Kanti. He's too dangerous." She stared at the notebook, her heart pounding. Trust Nokosi or protect Halona. She felt trapped, the tension between them thick and heavy. A sharp knock broke the silence, making Kanti jump. Nokosi opened the door, revealing a woman in black, her hat shadowing her face. She stepped inside her boots, clicking softly, and fixed her piercing eyes on Kanti. "I can save your sister," she said, her voice smooth like a blade. Kanti's pulse raced. "Who are you?" she demanded, stepping back. The woman tilted her head, smirking. "Someone who hates Hale." "Give me the notebook, and I'll tell you where Halona is." Kanti's hand hovered near the notebook, her stomach knotting. "Prove it," she said, her voice shaking. The woman pulled out a woven bracelet. Halona's and Kanti's breath caught her eyes welling up. "She's alive," the woman said, "but not for long." Nokosi hissed, "It's a trick." Kanti's mind whirled. Hope clashed with distrust. She clutched the notebook tighter, her voice trembling. "Why should I believe you?" The woman's gaze hardened. "Because you're out of time." Kanti's heart thundered as she faced the choice torn between risk and rescue. Kanti stood outside Hale's office, her heart racing like a drum in her chest. She had to get Halona back, no matter what. Her hands shook as she pushed the heavy door open, stepping into a room that smelled of smoke and power. Hale sat behind his desk, his cold gray eyes locked on her unblinking. "You want your sister?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. Kanti nodded, her mouth dry as sand. "I'll stay quiet," she said, her words trembling. "Just let her go." Hale leaned back, a cruel smile curling his lips. "It's not that simple," he replied, tapping a pen on the desk. Kanti's stomach twisted. She could feel the trap closing in. "She's only 10. She pleaded, her voice cracking. Hale stood towering over her and pointed to Roy in the corner. "You'll pay first," he said, his tone sharp as a blade. Roy cracked his knuckles, his shadow stretching across the floor. Kanti's knees felt weak, but she clenched her fists. She'd do anything for Halona, even this. The air in Hale's office turned heavy as Roy stepped closer, his boots thudding on the wood. Kanti's heart pounded. She wanted to run, but the door was locked tight. "You've been trouble," Hale said, lighting a cigar, his eyes glinting with pleasure. Roy grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her skin like claws. "No!" Kanti gasped, but Roy shoved her hard against the wall. Pain exploded in her back, and she struggled to breathe. "Teacher," Hale ordered, his voice cold and calm. Roy's fist crashed into her side, and Kanti crumpled, her vision blurring. Blood dripped from her nose, staining her dress. "I won't break," she whispered, defiance sparking in her chest. Hale laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Again," he said, puffing smoke. Roy hit her jaw, and she fell to her knees, the room spinning. Through the pain, she glared at Hale, her spirit fighting to stay alive. "You'll regret this," she hissed. Hale only smirked, enjoying her suffering. Suddenly, the door slammed open, and Nokosi burst in, his eyes wild with anger. "Let her go!" he roared, charging at Roy. Kanti lay on the floor, her body screaming with pain, her breath shallow. She heard the crack of Nokosi's fist hitting Roy's face, a chaotic blur of movement. "Kanti, move!" Nokosi shouted, his voice cutting through her daze. She pushed herself up, her arms trembling, blood smeared on her hands. Roy's men stormed in, but Nokosi grabbed a lamp, smashing it over one's head. "Come on!" he yelled, pulling her toward the exit. Kanti stumbled, her legs barely holding her weight, but Nokosi's strong arm kept her upright. They ran into the night, the cold air stinging her cuts. Shouts faded behind them as they ducked into a narrow street. "You're okay now?" Nokosi panted, his face tight with worry. Kanti's head swam, her strength fading. She collapsed against him, darkness swallowing her as he held her close. Kanti sat by her window, her bruised face hidden behind a shawl. The Osage community buzzed outside, their voices low but sharp. "She's stirring up trouble," an elder muttered, his eyes narrowing at her house. Kanti's chest ached, not from the beating but from their words. At the well, two women whispered, "Hale's never hurt us." Their accusing glances cut deeper than Roy's fists. Kanti pulled her shawl tighter, her fingers cold and shaky. She'd fought for them, but now they turned away. In the market, a man blocked her path. "You're lying about Hale," he said loudly, drawing stairs. Kanti's face burned as she hurried home, her basket empty, alone. She sat in the dark, the silence heavy. "They hate me," she murmured, tears slipping down her cheeks. The doubt from her own people felt like a stone on her heart, but she wouldn't let it crush her. She'd keep fighting even if she stood alone. The barn was dim, lit only by flickering lanterns as Aiyana called the secret meeting. Kanti sat in the back, her head low, feeling broken. Aiyana stood up, her voice steady and fierce. "Kanti's not the enemy," she said, pointing at the crowd. "Hale is." People shifted, some frowning, others listening. She faced him, for us. Aiyana added her hand, resting on Kanti's shoulder. Warmth spread through Kanti's chest. She wasn't forgotten. "He took my son." An old man said, his voice shaking. "And my fields," a woman chimed in, her eyes wet. Aiyana's words grew louder. "We fight together, or we lose everything." The room hummed with murmurs, then nods. Kanti lifted her head, meeting hopeful gazes. "We're behind you," Aiyana whispered, her grip firm. Kanti's heart swelled. Pain still lingered, but now she had strength. The community was turning, and she felt alive again. The sun dipped low, painting the empty field in shades of orange. Kanti stood alone, her boots sinking slightly into the soft earth. She twisted her fingers together, eyes scanning the horizon. Then a woman appeared, Margaret Hale, wife of William Hale. Her fine dress fluttered in the breeze, but her face was pale, almost ghostly. She stopped a few steps from Kanti, her hands trembling. "I had to see you," Margaret whispered, her voice shaking like a leaf. Kanti frowned, noticing the way Margaret's eyes flicked around, as if scared of being watched. "What's wrong?" Kanti asked softly. Margaret's fingers clutched her dress, knuckles white. "I feel so guilty," she said, her voice breaking. "Hale. He's hurt so many. Your family included." Tears glistened in her eyes, and she looked away, ashamed. Kanti's heart raced. Could Margaret really help? "Why tell me this?" Kanti pressed, stepping closer. Margaret swallowed hard, her shoulders sagging. "Because I can't live with it anymore," she murmured, her gaze finally meeting Kanti's raw with regret. Margaret paced her grand parlor, the soft carpet muffling her steps. A vase of roses sat on the table, their scent sweet but suffocating. She glanced at the heavy wooden door, imagining Hale bursting through it, her silk dress swished as she moved her hands, shaking slightly. "If he finds out I'm finished," she whispered to herself, picturing his stern face and cold voice. She stopped, pressing a hand to her chest. Helping Kanti meant risking everything. But then she thought of Halona, a child caught in Hale's cruelty. Her throat tightened. She couldn't bear it. "I have to do something," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. Outside, the sky darkened, mirroring her fear. Hale's power was everywhere, his men, his spies. She hugged herself, shivering despite the warm room. "What if he knows already?" she muttered, her stomach twisting. Still the guilt gnawed at her, heavier than her fear. She took a shaky breath, deciding. "I'll help her," she vowed quietly, her resolve fragile but growing. Under a big oak tree in the town square, Kanti faced Margaret. The evening air was cool, but sweat beaded on Kanti's forehead. She wiped her hands on her pants, her heart thumping. "I need to find Halona," she said, her voice urgent but hushed. Margaret's eyes widened, and she clutched her shawl tighter. "I don't know much," she stammered, glancing over her shoulder. Kanti leaned in, desperate. "Please, anything, where is she?" Her voice cracked, and she pressed her hands together, begging. Margaret hesitated, her lips trembling. "There's a warehouse," she whispered finally. "Hale goes there sometimes." Kanti's pulse quickened. A clue at last. "Thank you," she breathed, her eyes shining with hope. Margaret nodded, her fingers fidgeting nervously. "Just be careful," she warned, her voice soft and strained. Kanti touched her arm lightly, grateful. "I promise," she said, feeling a spark of strength. The plan was risky, but it was all she had. Margaret rushed through the shadowy streets, her breath coming in quick gasps. Her promise to Kanti echoed in her mind, but fear gripped her tighter. Hale's anger was a storm she couldn't face. She reached their house, pausing at the door, her hand shaking as she turned the knob. Inside, Hale sat by the fireplace, his face calm but his eyes sharp as knives. "You're late," he said, his voice low and dangerous. Margaret forced a weak smile, her heart pounding. "I was walking," she lied, her voice too high-pitched. Hale stared, and she felt herself unravel. "I saw Kanti," she blurted, unable to stop. His eyebrow rose. "What did she want?" he asked, leaning closer. Margaret's mouth went dry. "She asked about Halona. I told her about the warehouse," she confessed, her hands clenching. Hale stood, his silence deafening. "Good," he said coldly, and Margaret's stomach dropped. She'd saved herself, but at what cost? Guilt flooded her bitter and heavy. Kanti edged toward the warehouse, her footsteps quiet on the dirt path. The building loomed ahead, dark and silent, its windows black. She gripped her knife, thinking of Halona maybe so close now. But as she slipped inside, the air felt wrong too. Still. Then a voice cut through the dark. "Lost, are we?" Roy stepped out, his grin wicked, his eyes gleaming. Kanti froze. It was a trap. Men emerged from the shadows, circling her like wolves. "Hale says, hello." Roy taunted, his voice dripping with glee. Kanti's knees shook, but she raised her chin. "I'll fight you all," she snarled, her voice fierce. Roy charged, and she ducked, slashing at him. Another man grabbed her, his grip iron tight, twisting her arm. Pain shot through her, and she gasped, kicking wildly. Fists struck her fast and brutal, blurring her vision. She clawed back, desperate, Halona's face flashing in her mind. But the numbers overwhelmed her, and as darkness crept in, she roared one last defiant cry. Kanti lay on the cold, hard floor, her body sore from the beating. Her chest heaved with shallow breaths as Roy's men towered over her, their rough laughter filling the dim room. Suddenly a loud gunshot pierced the air, sharp and startling. The men stopped laughing, their faces turning white with shock. From the dark corner, a woman in a black coat stepped out, her gun aimed straight at them. "Back off now," she ordered, her voice cold and commanding. The men exchanged nervous looks, unsure what to do. She fired again, the bullet smashing a lantern, sending flames spilling across the floor. Panic broke out. Roy's men yelled and stumbled over each other to escape the fire. Kanti gritted her teeth, forcing her shaky legs to stand. The woman grabbed her arm, pulling her hard toward a side door. "Run now," she snapped, her tone urgent. They burst into the chilly night, the wind stinging Kanti's bruised face. Behind them, angry shouts faded as they darted through narrow alleys. Finally they stopped, both gasping for air. Kanti's heart raced as she whispered, "Who are you?" The woman's eyes flashed with determination. "Someone who hates Hale as much as you do," she said fiercely. In a cramped, shadowy room, Kanti sat across from the woman in black, the flickering lamp casting long shadows on the walls. The air felt heavy with unspoken words. "I used to be a federal agent." The woman began, her voice steady but quiet. Kanti's eyes widened, her heart skipping a beat. "I've been chasing Hale for years. He's cunning, always slipping away," she continued, pulling a worn folder from her bag. She opened it, revealing photos of Hale with dangerous men. Piles of money and illegal guns. Kanti's hands trembled as she leaned closer, her mind reeling at the proof of Hale's crimes. "He's not just taking land. He's a criminal kingpin," the woman said, pointing at a blurry picture of Hale, smiling smugly. Kanti swallowed hard, fear mixing with anger in her chest. "Why save me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The woman's stern face softened for a moment. "Because you've got courage and evidence," she said, glancing at Kanti's notebook. "We can stop him together." Kanti's breath caught a spark of hope igniting inside her. For the first time she felt a real chance against Hale. Kanti climbed onto a rickety crate in the town square, her stomach twisting with nerves. A crowd of Osage people gathered, their eyes curious but wary. "Hale's stealing our land and killing our people," she shouted, her voice shaking at first but growing stronger. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Some nodded. Others frowned, unsure. "He took my sister." "Halona." Kanti cried, her throat tightening as tears threatened to spill. Gasps rose from the group, and a few heads bowed in sorrow. She held up her notebook, its pages flapping in the wind. "This proves he's a murderer!" she yelled, her anger burning bright. An old man shuffled forward, his voice rough. "He's too powerful. What can we do?" Kanti's fists clenched, her resolve hardening. "We fight back together. We march to his office and demand justice," she urged. A young woman stepped up, her eyes fierce. "I'm in," she said loudly. More voices joined, growing into a chorus of agreement. Kanti's heart pounded with pride and hope. Their strength was rising, and Hale would face it soon. The crowd marched down the dusty road, their chants echoing like thunder. Kanti walked at the front, her head held high, the notebook pressed against her chest. Dust swirled around their feet as they neared Hale's office. Suddenly, Sheriff Burns and his deputies appeared, blocking the way with rifles and batons. Burns smirked, his voice dripping with scorn. "Turn back or you'll pay," he shouted, resting a hand on his pistol. Kanti's stomach sank, but she stood firm. "We want Hale locked up." She shot back, her voice ringing out. Burns laughed darkly, waving his men forward. The deputies charged their batons, swinging wildly. Kanti dodged a blow, but it clipped her arm, sending sharp pain through her body. Screams filled the air as the crowd clashed with the deputies. Fists flew and people fell. Kanti's breath came fast, her fear rising, but she yelled, "Don't give up!" A deputy lunged at her again, his eyes cold. She stumbled, her knees hitting the ground, but her spirit burned hotter than ever. The fight was brutal, and hope felt fragile. Blood trickled down Kanti's cheek, but she pushed herself up her legs, trembling. Around her, the Osage people refused to break. They locked arms, forming a solid line against Burns's men. Their faces glowed with defiance, their voices rising in a united chant. "We won't run!" Kanti shouted, her voice raw but fierce, her chest swelling with emotion. Sheriff Burns glared, sweat beading on his forehead, as his deputies hesitated. Exhausted, an elderly woman stepped forward, her wrinkled hands clenched. "You can't crush us all," she said, her words cutting like a blade. Burns's sneer faltered in his eyes, darting over the growing crowd. More Osage joined their numbers, overwhelming their courage, unshakable. "Pull back!" Burns growled at his men, his voice tight with frustration. The deputies retreated, their boots dragging in the dirt. A cheer exploded from the crowd, loud and triumphant. Kanti's eyes filled with tears, her heart aching with joy and relief. They hadn't just survived, they'd stood as one. Hale's power was cracking and justice felt closer than ever. Kanti and Nokosi sat in a cramped, shadowy room, a single oil lamp casting a weak glow. The table was scratched and worn, littered with papers. They pored over the notebook, its leather cover cracked from use. Kanti's hands shook as she pointed to an entry, October 15th, 50. Rifles to White Riders North Ridge. Nokosi's eyes narrowed, his breath hissing out. "Hoyle's behind it all." He growled, his voice tight with fury. Kanti turned another page, spotting a sketch of a dynamite crate. Her heart sank as she recalled the burned-out homes near the river. "He's arming them to destroy us," she whispered, her voice trembling. Nokosi's fist hit the table, the lamp flickering wildly. Dust floated in the air, tickling their noses. "This explains the raids," he said, his jaw clenched. Kanti's fingers brushed a smeared ink stain, her mind racing with fear and anger. The silence grew heavy, broken only by the creak of the floorboards. They knew now Hale's power was built on blood, and they were holding the proof. The notebook glowed faintly under the lamp, its pages revealing a web of corruption. Kanti read aloud. "Sheriff Burns, $200, October 3rd. Her voice faltered as she saw more names, the judge, the tax collector. Nokosi leaned back his chair, scraping the floor. "They're all bought," he said, his tone bitter. Kanti's mind flashed to Sheriff Burns, tipping his hat to her last spring, his smile fake. He knew she murmured, her chest tight with betrayal. Nokosi kicked a loose nail on the floor, his anger boiling over. "That's why they let Hale run free," he snapped. The room felt smaller, the air stale and suffocating. Kanti's eyes stung as she found a note about a bribe after her uncle's murder. "They sold us out," she said, her voice breaking. Nokosi's hands balled into fists, his knuckles pale. Outside a dog barked faintly, but inside the silence screamed. They realized no one in power would help. The notebook was their only weapon now. Kanti stood by the window, the glass cool against her fingertips. Moonlight spilled into the room, glinting off the notebook on the table. "We send it to the woman in black," she said firmly, her eyes fierce. Nokosi frowned, his arms crossed. "It's dangerous," he warned, his voice low. Kanti nodded, her braid swinging as she turned. "But it's right," she countered, thinking of her sister, Halona, lost to Hale's schemes. She grabbed a pencil, its tip blunt, and scribbled a note. "Old Mill tomorrow." Her heart raced, but her hand stayed steady. Nokosi sighed, rubbing his tired eyes. "If they catch us." He started, but Kanti cut him off. "They won't," she said, her voice hard as stone. She tucked the notebook into her coat, the fabric rough against her skin. The stakes were clear: freedom or death. As they stepped into the night, the wind howled, carrying their hopes and fears. Roy lounged by the saloon door, a cigarette dangling from his lips. He overheard a drunk miner mutter, "Kanti's got Hale's book?" His pulse quickened as he crushed the cigarette under his boot. He slipped inside the room, smoky and loud, and caught another whisper. "Proof of everything." Roy's grin was cold as he strode to Hale's office. The boss sat in a plush chair, a glass of whiskey in hand. "Kanti's got your notebook," Roy said, his voice sharp. Hale's eyes turned to ice, his fingers tapping the desk. "Get it back," he ordered, his tone deadly. "Calm." Roy nodded, his hat shadowing his face. He gathered his men outside their spurs, jingling as they mounted up. The night was dark, the moon hidden by clouds. Roy's mind buzzed with the thrill of the hunt. Kanti didn't know what was coming. Kanti and Nokosi ran through the town, their shadows long under the street lamps. The notebook pressed against Kanti's ribs, a lifeline and a target. Hooves pounded behind them. Roy's voice roared, "Stop them!" Kanti's breath burned in her chest, her boots slipping on mud. They ducked into an alley, trash cans clattering as they passed. A bullet whizzed by, cracking a brick wall. "Faster!" Nokosi shouted, his hand yanking her forward. Her legs screamed, but Halona's face flashed in her mind, pushing her on. Roy's men shouted their lanterns, swinging wildly. Kanti tripped over a loose stone, her knee scraping raw, but Nokosi pulled her up. They dove behind a shed, the wood damp and splintered. The hoofbeats faded, and Kanti's heart thudded in her ears. They were safe for now, but the fight was far from over. Kanti stood in the narrow alley, her breath puffing out in small clouds against the cold night. The woman in black loomed before her, her wide-brimmed hat casting shadows over her face. Kanti's hands shook as she gripped the notebook, its leather edges soft from years of use. She thrust it forward, her voice barely a whisper. "Take it." The woman's gloved fingers snatched it quickly, her eyes glinting with purpose. "This will ruin him," she hissed, tucking it under her coat. Suddenly, heavy footsteps thundered nearby. Kanti's heart sank as Roy's men burst from the darkness, their coats flapping like wings. Nokosi grunted as two of them tackled him, pinning his arms to the wet cobblestones. "Kanti, run!" he shouted, his voice raw with panic. Roy strolled up, his crooked smile gleaming under a street lamp. "Too late," he taunted, his breath sour. Kanti's chest tightened, her eyes darting to the woman in black, who was already gone. She clenched her fists, her nails biting into her skin, fear and anger warring inside her. The letter from Hale came with the sunrise, its words scratched in harsh black ink. Kanti read it aloud to herself. her voice trembling. Notebook for Nokosi warehouse. Midnight. She crumpled it in her fist, the paper crackling loudly. "It's a trick," she muttered, pacing the tiny room. The wooden floor groaned under her boots, and a thin layer of dust danced in the morning light. She pictured Nokosi's warm grin. Then Halona's wide, frightened eyes, both trapped because of her. Her stomach twisted a heavy knot of dread. "He'll take the book and kill them anyway," she said, her throat dry. The wind outside rattled the window panes, a low moan filling the silence. She dropped to the floor, her hands shaking as she pressed them to her face. "I can't lose them," she whispered, her voice breaking. But then something fierce sparked in her chest. She stood brushing her hair back, her eyes narrowing. "I'll beat him," she promised herself, grabbing her coat from the hook, its weight steadying her. Aiyana's house glowed with warmth, the fireplace snapping and popping. Kanti sat cross-legged on a thick rug, her fingers twisting nervously. Aiyana stood tall, her dark hair braided tight, her voice ringing with strength. "We'll stand with you," she said, her gaze locking with Kanti's. The Osage group around them murmured agreement, their faces set like stone. Aiyana unrolled a map across the table, its corners curling up. "Here's the warehouse, 2 doors," she said, tapping the paper with a steady finger. Kanti leaned closer, her pulse racing as she traced the lines with her eyes. "We'll split up. Half draw them out. Half sneak in." Aiyana continued her tone, sharp and sure. Kanti nodded her breath, shallow. "I'll get Halona," she said, her voice firm despite the fear bubbling inside. Aiyana squeezed her shoulder, her touch warm. "You're not alone," she said softly. Kanti swallowed hard, her heart swelling with hope as the room filled with the quiet clink of weapons being checked. The warehouse squatted in the darkness, its broken windows like empty eyes. Kanti moved ahead, her boots crunching softly on loose gravel. The air smelled of rust and damp wood, thick with danger. She raised her hand, signaling the Osage team behind her. Half broke off toward the front, their shadows melting into the night. Kanti gripped her knife, its handle slick with sweat, and slipped toward the side door. Inside the space was a tangle of crates and dim corners. She crept forward, her ears straining, then a small scared whimper. "Halona," she breathed, her heart leaping. She darted toward the sound, her boots skidding on the greasy floor. There, tied to a chair, was Halona, her face pale, her hair tangled. Kanti's hand shook as she sliced through the ropes, the blade catching slightly. "I've got you," she whispered, pulling Halona into her arms. The girl's thin frame trembled, but Kanti held her tight, her jaw clenched. They still had to get out. Roy's laugh cut through the warehouse, sharp and cruel. Kanti shoved Halona behind her, her knife flashing in the dim light. Roy stepped forward, his boots scuffing the floor, his eyes wild with glee. "You're stubborn. I'll give you that," he sneered, his voice dripping with venom. Kanti's blood roared in her ears, her fear burning into fury. No more games. She snapped her stance wide. Roy charged his fist, swinging fast. Kanti ducked her knife, slicing his sleeve, drawing a thin red line. He cursed, his face twisting as he swung again. She stumbled back, her shoulders slamming into a crate. Roy's hand clamped around her neck, squeezing hard. Her breath caught, stars bursting in her vision, but she rammed her elbow into his ribs. He wheezed, his grip slipping. With a cry, she slashed once more, her blade sinking deep. Roy staggered, blood staining his shirt, and fell to his knees. Kanti stood over him, panting, her voice low, for them. Her hands shook, but her heart blazed. She was free. Kanti moved quietly through the dark warehouse, her boots tapping softly on the cold floor. Her heart raced a loud drum in her chest as she scanned the shadows. The air was heavy with the smell of rust and wet wood, making her stomach twist. She saw a small door ahead, its paint chipped and faded, barely hanging on. With a shaky hand she pushed it open. The loud creak cutting through the silence. There in the corner was Halona curled up tight, her knees against her chest, her face dirty and wet with tears. Halona. Kanti whispered, her voice cracking with fear and love. Halona jerked, her big eyes flashing with panic like a trapped bird. Kanti dropped to her knees, her hands reaching out slow and careful. "It's me," she said, her throat tight with emotion. Halona's small body shook, her fingers gripping her torn clothes, her breathing fast and uneven. Kanti pulled her into a soft hug, feeling Halona's stiffness, her silence louder than words. Tears rolled down Kanti's cheeks as she held her sister, the weight of Halona's pain breaking her heart. Shouts exploded in the warehouse, sharp and angry. As Hale's men charged in, Kanti held Halona tight, her arms trembling, her eyes darting around in terror. Nokosi stepped forward, his face hard, his shoulders squared. "Run, Kanti!" He barked, his voice strong and urgent. She froze, her feet stuck to the ground, watching as a man swung at her with a fist. Nokosi crashed into him, both hitting the floor with a thud, dust flying up. More men came, their heavy steps shaking the room, their yells filling the air. Nokosi fought hard, his fists fast, but a bat smashed into his ribs with a sickening crack. He gasped, blood dripping from his lips, his body swaying. "Nokosi!" Kanti cried, her scream tearing out of her. He stumbled up, pushing her toward the door with weak hands. "Go now!" he choked out, just as another blow hit his head. He fell hard, motionless, as Kanti pulled Halona away, tears blinding her. Her last look back showed him lying there surrounded, and her chest burned with guilt and sorrow. Kanti sat in a small dim room, her hands shaking around a cup of water she couldn't drink. The woman in black stood tall by the window, her dark coat catching the last bits of sunlight. "Hale's been watched for a long time," she said, her voice steady and sure. Kanti blinked her head, lifting fast. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice small but hopeful. The woman turned, holding the notebook in her gloved hand, its edges rough and worn. "This proves everything, his crimes, his lies," she said, her eyes sharp. Kanti's breath stopped for a moment, her mind spinning. "So, he's done?" she asked, a spark of light growing inside her. The woman nodded, her face softening just a little. "With this, we've got him." Kanti's shoulders dropped, a heavy weight lifting, but Nokosi's face flashed in her mind, dimming her relief. She swallowed hard, her voice thick. "Thank you," she said, feeling both grateful and torn. The woman squeezed her shoulder gently, a quiet promise of better days. The morning sun shone bright as federal agents rolled into town, their black cars lined up like soldiers. Kanti stood with the crowd, her heart thumping loud, watching them close in on Hale's big house. The door flew open with a bang, and Hale staggered out, wrists locked in cuffs, his face red with fury. "You can't do this," he shouted, his voice breaking apart. An agent stepped forward, holding the notebook high, its pages fluttering in the wind. "Your own words caught you," he said, cold and final. Hale's eyes bulged, his jaw dropping as Roy and the others were pulled out behind him, heads down. The people around Kanti cheered, their voices loud and joyful, a wave of sound crashing over her. She stood still, her hands in fists, staring at Hale as he glared at her from the car window. She didn't look away, her back straight, feeling the power of this moment. The car sped off, leaving dust and silence, and Kanti knew justice had won. The courtroom hummed with voices, every seat filled the air, thick with waiting. Kanti sat close to Halona, holding her sister's cold hand, feeling every tremble. Hale stood at the front, his head low as the judge's voice rang out, "Guilty." The crowd roared, clapping and shouting, and Kanti let out a long, shaky breath. Outside the Osage, people stood together, smiles breaking through years of hurt, their land, theirs again. Kanti wrapped Halona in a hug, her sister's arms slow to move, but finally holding back. "We're okay now?" Kanti whispered, her eyes wet, But then she saw Nokosi wheeled out by a friend, his legs wrapped tight, his grin brave but tired. Halona still jumped at sudden sounds, her face shadowed by fear. Kanti's chest tightened. Victory wasn't perfect. Yet as the sun sank low, glowing warm over their home, she felt their strength. They'd fought for truth, for family, and won. Healing would come step by step together.